time before you have a compass, and you're sailing on a sailing ship just out of sight of land. And it's a dark, cloudy night, so you can't read the stars. So how do you know what direction you're moving in and where you're going? You can't. That's like flying blind, sailing with no knowledge of the direction you're in or the place you're going. Well, that's what happens with the abolition of the price system in a market. It is the equivalent of the compass that guides and steers everyone in that vast system of division of labor to apply themselves in ways that are most efficient and productive, and all guided by, and ultimately, the profit motive of what will satisfy consumers. And that's what socialism abolished in wherever it came into force. And by doing away with that, it lost the ability to make goods efficiently, productively, or in the eyes of what the consumers might want. Because the government co-opted that. Even if they had wanted to do what consumers wanted, they had lost the institutional methods and mechanisms without which such rational choice could not be made. That is why, even if the Soviet Union and the other communist countries had not been brutal dictatorships, even if they had not resorted to mass murders in the name of making utopia, at the end of the day, the system would fail because it could not rationally organize the economic activities of the society. That is why, well, when one went to communist countries, the shelves were empty, or the wrong goods were there in the terms of poor quality, shoddy products, in the wrong types and forms and amounts that consumers actually wanted. Because there was no mechanism for people to communicate with each other, because they were not allowed to. And they were not allowed to because they couldn't own and decide to produce and then communicate with each other through prices as to what they would like to demand and what they might be able to supply. That meant the failure and the inability of a socialist system to work. That is why socialism failed. And combined with this economic unworkability was the fact that these countries were controlled by little circles of dictators who were confident, arrogant, that they knew how to remake a society and anyone who was in the way would be done away with. That is why, except in a handful of places like North Korea, who'd want to live in North Korea? Or Cuba, and even Cuba is changing. Raul Castro says they need to, have reforms. He's firing, tens of thousands of government employees. Tells them to get jobs in the private sector. I wish the U.S. president would do that with government employees. Anyway, go get a private job. It's terrible when Raul Castro sounds more capitalist than the president of the United States. Anyway, get a job in the private sector. No more government jobs. Raul Castro for president, I guess, in the U.S. I don't know. Well, I don't want to go that far. Okay. Poetic license here. Okay. So anyway, socialism was a dream that could not be achieved. And it died because it was of its brutality, its denial of freedom, and its failure to be able to give anything that people wanted. It left all of these socialist countries economic basket cases, having to now reconstruct and reform themselves after anywhere from a half a century to 75 years of economic disaster. It leads us to the conclusion, based upon what we were talking about last time, that in its institutional form, there is no viable alternative to a functioning and institutionally recognized competitive free market economy. It only gives people freedom, and it only has the institutional signals and mechanisms to bring coordination, pattern, and prosperity to the people of the society. Socialism failed. Markets work. That they're institutionally incompatible. Either the government owns the property or private individuals own the property. Either the government plans for everyone, or each individual has the freedom to plan his own life. The socialists used to say, the choice is socialist planning or chaos. No. The question wasn't planning versus no planning. The question was, who should plan? Should the government plan for everyone in the society from a central agency? Or should each of us be free to plan our own lives as we think best and appropriate, and coordinate our plans with others through the free contracts and exchanges of the marketplace. So a plurality of plans, interacting and coordinating through the market, or a single imposed plan on everybody. And that means that institutionally they are inherently incompatible. Either you control your life or the planner controls your life. Either you plan what you do or the planner plans for you. Either you have a chance to be free in your choices and owning property, starting a business, deciding how to manage it, how to grow it, what to produce, or the central planner is the dictator who imposes that upon you, and you are merely an employee who is told by the government monopoly employer what to do. And there's really no institutional compatibility between them. Yes.
Okay, I'm aware that there's no pure planned or pure capitalist country, and the Bahamas is a market socialist. So do you think that it's more efficient to be market socialist than it is to be capitalist?
No. First of all, you don't have a socialist economy. I assume that most of it, okay, I don't know enough institutions. Are most industries privately owned here or government owned? Privately owned, okay? But what the government does do, I presume, is regulate some of that private business activity, and they tax to redistribute some wealth for welfare spending program purposes. Would that be a fair statement? Okay, so what you have a regulated market economy with welfare redistribution. But that's not socialism. Socialism is, by definition, an economic system where the government either owns or, through its power, controls the use of resources in the society and commands and dictates it from a central plan. That is the model, whether it be the communist version or the fascist Nazi version. They all had this ideal of the government planning the economy, directing and commanding where people worked, what they produced, how they produced, to whom the output was distributed from a central planning authority. That is historically socialism. That system failed. That's why you don't see socialism in the Bahamas. That's why you don't see socialism in France, where they had a very strong itself, a strong socialist party. Institutionally, it doesn't work. So what they've fallen back on is not socializing and planning the economy in this central way, but imposing a spider's web of regulations and controls and then redistributing wealth. What are the consequences of that? Well, to be honest, the next lecture after this one, we finish the Q&A, government regulation in the interventionist state. And then on tomorrow, before lunch, the ethics of economics in the welfare state. Okay, so socialism doesn't work. Is it necessary to regulate the economy? Does the government need to intervene in the economy? Does the government need to redistribute wealth in various and sundry ways for various and sundry reasons? That's what those two lectures. The next one on government regulation and intervention, and tomorrow on the welfare state will be about. I'll try to point out the limits, problems, and incompatibilities of those as well. The bottom line is that you don't have a social society, you have a regulated redistributive society that feeds off whatever prosperity is generated by the private sector. Because there'd be nothing to redistribute unless the private sector had first produced. The government can't take milk from the farmers unless the farmers have still first grown the cows that produce the milk. So what the welfare state does is live off the productivity of the private sector. Because there's nothing to consume if it hasn't first been produced.
Okay,
Yes.
what is the distinction between communism and socialism?
That's a very interesting question, and historically, it's ambiguous. In the 19th century, for most of the 19th century, when people would use the word communism and socialism, they would use them interchangeable, like synonymous. Like often, though there are subtle differences, people will still talk about freedom and liberty. Historically, they're not quite the same, but we use them as interchangeable synonyms. Well, in the 19th century, when people spoke about communism or socialism, for most of the 19th century, they did it the same way. Then a split occurred in the late 19th and early 20th century between socialists and socialists who believed on different methods of how a socialist regime and system should come to power. There was one branch, heavily located in Germany, who believed that socialism could